Well, so we've taken care of our plants all season long, and now we've come to the end of the season, and it's time to clean up at the end of the season. So fall cleanup can be anything you want it to be. We have to take into consideration sanitation, and that is removing from the garden anything that is a diseased leaf or diseased plant material that can carry over to the next year and cause further problems the next year. On the right-hand side of the slide, and the upper picture is apple scab. Apple scab is something that, even if it isn't in the compost pile, it will continue to spread, and you're best getting rid of apple scab leaves and scab-infested leaves. The lower picture on the right-hand side is of tar spot, which was so prevalent in southeastern Wisconsin this year. And that one doesn't tend to spread from a compost pile. All you need to do is remove the leaves from the base of the plant, put them into the compost pile, and you're still okay. So you need to know which things you can do that with and which ones you can't. And if in doubt, remove it. Get it out of there, burn it, bury it, or take it to the municipal yard waste facility. And people often laugh when I say that and think, oh yeah, you're just giving somebody else your problems. But they manage the yard waste in such a way that it heats up well, it's windrowed, it heats up thoroughly, they turn it over, it heats up thoroughly again, and many of the organisms are killed off, and so it generally isn't a problem. But then there's also seasonal interest. There are a lot of plants that really have their own subtle beauty for the winter. Sometimes we plant things because they have those beautiful rose hips or a lovely fruit, or in the case of ornamental grasses or hydrangeas, you like the way they look in the winter. So if you like the way something looks in the winter, leave it. If you know that there are seeds on that plant that birds like, leave it for the birds. If you can't stand the way it looks in your landscape, cut it down in the fall and get rid of it. Otherwise, wait until spring. So it's kind of your own personal preference whether you want to do a lot of cleanup in the fall or just a little bit. Fall is a perfect time to do some composting, and you will have a section on composting, so we're not going to go into that, but it's the management of all this organic waste that is created just through the cycle of a garden through the season. And then extending the season. This is, as you become more and more interested in and adept at gardening, you'll find that you want to continue growing things later into the fall. You want to try and get things going earlier in the spring. And individual plant covers are one way to do that. The glass bell jars that you see are called cloches. And small little greenhouse kind of structure that you can end up trapping some heat in there and growing plants earlier in the spring, vent them a little bit when it gets hot during the day, and then cover them over again at night. In the fall, protecting plants from frost with old bed sheets. That's the tried and true old bed sheet method of extending the season. And then there's the wall of water, and I like this picture because it's this little tiny guy who they're trying to make it look like so simple, even a kid can do it, even a 2-year-old can do it. These are cylinders that are made up of cylinders that you fill with water. And that water then absorbs heat, and then that heat is radiated around the plant and keeps the plant warmer. What you'll notice here, though, is he has this wall of water over a white bucket, because just filling these little cylinders of water isn't as easy as it looks. What you'll need to do is have a tomato cage or a white bucket or something that will support it until you get most of those little tubes filled with water. But that's another one of those individual plant covers that can help to extend the season both in the spring and in the fall. Cold frames are another way to extend the season, spring and fall. Lots of things that you can do with a cold frame. Cold frames are essentially a box that has glass windows on it, a glass window on it that faces south. So when that window is closed, it faces south. That collects the heat from the sun, warms the inside of that frame, and then during the day when it gets quite hot, you prop it open, allow the cooler air to get in, and gradually as the season gets warmer and the nights get warmer and you don't need to protect the plants as much, you leave it open longer and longer periods of time. You can start flats of seeds in cold frames. You can carry bulbs over for the winter in cold frames. You can start seedlings, all kinds of things. You can grow spinach and lettuce in there very early in the spring. The real difficulty with using them, however, is that you have to be there to open and close the sash, the window. And in this case, that window is just held up by a couple of sticks. Good gust of wind comes along, blows that glass window off of there and breaks it. So it should be fastened somehow. Ideally, they do have solar openers and closers, so you can let the temperature regulate the opening and closing of that sash. I have not used one of those, but I would like to. But that's the concept of a cold frame. Now, this was an interesting item to Google for Google Images, as you might imagine, the hotbed. Hotbeds are essentially a cold frame that is filled with manure. So they're deeper, and a lot of that depth is taken up by pretty fresh manure. And the fresh manure then gives off heat, and that's like having a heated base that you can then put flats of seedlings on. That warm base provides the bottom heat that you need for starting seeds, and the air temperature is controlled by the window and the opening and closing of the window. And I know that when you talk about annuals and perennials, you are going to go into seed starting to a much greater degree, and hotbeds are a good way to do some seed starting early in the season. Floating row cover is a spun-bonded polyester fabric that allows moisture and light to penetrate through the fabric, and yet it helps to hold in some heat. So you can get a 5 to 8 degree difference underneath the floating row cover and extend the season a little bit at both ends that way. You can use hoop houses, the hoops there being PVC pipe with a little bit of, here is floating row cover, but you can also do it with plastic. And so that's extending the season. There is a little bit more detail about that in the chapter.